Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's case, we bring you a chilling and twisted tale, one of betrayal, deception, and a deadly obsession. This is the story of the Cannibal of Rotenburg, a meal to die for. A tale of obsession, anonymity, and the darkest depths of human depravity. This case will leave you asking, what happens when the line between fantasy and reality is crossed? How could a seemingly ordinary man become capable of unimaginable acts? Stay with us as we unravel the horrifying and perplexing story of the Cannibal of Rotenburg. What if the monster you fear isn't lurking in the shadows, but instead hiding in plain sight, behind a friendly smile, or even chatting with you online? In the quiet, picturesque town of Rotenburg, Germany, a shocking and grotesque crime emerged, one that would send ripples of horror across the world. A story of a man whose hunger went far beyond the ordinary. A story of trust turned fatal. A story where one person's nightmare became another's twisted dream. Rotenburg, a quaint town in the heart of Germany, seemed like a picture-perfect haven. Its lush forests and cobblestone streets meandered through clusters of half-timbered houses, and its residents enjoyed the slow rhythm of rural life. The town was the kind of place where little ever happened, a place where everyone assumed they knew their neighbors. But nestled at the edge of the town, surrounded by dense woods, was a farmhouse that kept its secrets well hidden. Its sole occupant, Armin Meaus, was just another quiet figure in the fabric of the community, or so it seemed. Armin was an unassuming man in his early 40s, known for his polite demeanor and routine existence. He worked as an IT technician, troubleshooting computer problems for clients who rarely gave him a second thought. His lanky frame, mild smile, and soft-spoken nature made him easy to overlook. He tended his small garden, shopped for groceries in town, and always offered a brief nod to anyone who passed him by. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, Armin harbored a darkness that no one could have imagined. His childhood had been far from idyllic. Raised by an authoritarian mother and an absent father, Armin had grown up in a stifling environment where isolation became his only refuge. When his mother passed away, the farmhouse became his prison of solitude, and his loneliness began to fester. What began as a coping mechanism soon transformed into something far more sinister. By day, Armin's life was mundane, predictable even, but by night his world shifted. Alone in the farmhouse, he would retreat to his computer, immersing himself in the vast and often unsettling corners of the internet. It started innocently enough, reading forums, browsing for connection, but his interest soon turned toward the bizarre. Armin discovered niche communities that catered to fantasies most would never dare speak aloud. These were spaces where societal taboos were dissected and discussed without judgment, and it was here that Armin found his people, or so he thought. Among these forums was one called Human Banque, a grotesque online hub for individuals who shared an unsettling fixation, the idea of cannibalism. At first, Armin was an observer, lurking in the shadows, reading posts, and scrolling through threads. He was fascinated by the hypothetical discussions, the what-ifs that other users entertained. Some spoke of their fantasies with a detached curiosity, while others detailed elaborate scenarios that sent shivers down even his spine. Yet, instead of recoiling, Armin felt drawn to it. What he had once dismissed as an abstract curiosity became an obsession that consumed his thoughts. One night, Armin stumbled upon a forum post that changed everything. Someone had posed a question: if given the chance, would you eat another human being? The thread exploded with responses, some humorous, others shockingly serious. For Armin, it was a revelation. He realized he wasn't alone in his macabre obsession, and perhaps, just perhaps, there were others willing to take it even further. The anonymity of the internet allowed Armin to delve deeper into these forbidden fantasies without fear of being judged. He began participating in the discussions, sharing his thoughts with a disturbing level of enthusiasm. His posts grew bolder over time, hinting at a desire to transform fantasy into reality. The more he engaged, the more he convinced himself that what he longed for was not just possible, it was necessary. Late one evening, as the farmhouse creaked under the weight of the wind, Armin sat in the glow of his computer screen, crafting a post that would change the course of his life forever. He wrote with precision, outlining his ultimate desire, to find someone willing to be consumed. The words felt both liberating and terrifying as he hit submit, sending his darkest thoughts into the void of the internet. For hours, he stared at the screen, waiting, wondering if anyone would respond. Most posts on the forum were met with casual replies or indifference, but Armin's ad was different. It struck a chord. Replies began trickling in. Some were jokes, others tentative inquiries, but nothing concrete. Days turned into weeks, and Armin began to lose hope. Then, one evening, a message appeared in his inbox. The sender's tone was calm, deliberate, and shockingly sincere. This stranger claimed to share his vision, offering not only curiosity but something far more unsettling: agreement. The message was brief yet charged with possibility, and as Armin read it, he felt a thrill unlike anything he had ever known. This wasn't merely a fantasy anymore, it was the beginning of a plan. The stranger had questions, ones that Armin answered with meticulous detail. The correspondence between the two men grew more intense, their shared obsession fueling a mutual anticipation. For Armin, this was validation, proof that he wasn't alone, that his desires could be met. Yet, a part of him wondered, was this real? Could someone truly agree to such an act? The thought both excited and unnerved him. As the days passed, Armin's routine continued as usual. He repaired computers, watered his garden, and waved to his neighbors as they passed his farmhouse. To anyone watching, he was the same quiet man they had always known, but inside the walls of his home, he was preparing. The farmhouse, once a place of solitude, became a space of chilling transformation. Armin began assembling what he called his slaughter chamber, a room designed for the unthinkable. Plastic sheeting covered the floors and walls, tools were arranged methodically, and a camcorder was set up to document every moment. The stage was set, but the question remained, would the stranger follow through? Would they truly arrive at his doorstep, ready to take part in the horrifying pact they had discussed? As the day of their meeting drew closer, Armin's anticipation reached a fever pitch. He felt both exhilarated and terrified, caught in a storm of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. But one thing was certain: his life, and the life of the person who had answered his ad, would never be the same. The quiet streets of Rotenburg remained undisturbed, the townsfolk blissfully unaware of the horror brewing in their midst. For now the farmhouse stood silent, its secrets hidden from the world, but that silence would not last. What had begun as a whispered fantasy in the dark corners of the internet was about to become a grim reality, one that would shock the world and leave a stain on Rotenburg's idyllic facade forever. The monster lurking within Armin Mai's had finally found its prey. In the heart of Berlin, the bustling city streets mirrored the chaos of Bernd Brandis's mind. By day, he appeared to live a stable and successful life. At 38, Bernd was an accomplished software engineer, the kind of man whose colleagues respected him for his meticulous attention to detail and calm demeanor. But beneath his polished exterior, a deep and relentless despair consumed him. He lived alone in a small, meticulously organized apartment, the silence within its walls echoing the void in his soul. Bernd's life had once been full of promise, married to a woman he loved, with close friends and a bright career. But the dream unraveled in a series of cruel blows. His marriage crumbled under the weight of misunderstandings and emotional distance. The friends he had once relied on drifted away, leaving him isolated in the very city that had once felt like home. Each day began to feel like a battle he was losing, the suffocating weight of his loneliness dragging him further into darkness. As the months turned into years, Bernd began to view his existence as a slow, meaningless march toward an inevitable end. He no longer found joy in the things that once gave him comfort. He moved through life mechanically, going through the motions of work and routine with little connection to the world around him. At night, unable to sleep, he wandered the vast expanse of the internet. It was a way to distract himself, to momentarily escape the oppressive thoughts that circled endlessly in his mind. One night, in a fit of restlessness, Bernd stumbled upon a forum unlike anything he had seen before. The site was called Human Banquet, a digital space that catered to the darkest of curiosities. At first, he was horrified by what he read: threads discussing cannibalism not as fiction, but as a genuine desire. Yet, as he scrolled further, he found himself unable to look away. The posts were disturbingly candid, exploring the psychology behind the acts, the logistics, even the moral implications. What shocked him most was the allure these discussions held over him. For reasons he couldn't fully explain, Bernd felt a strange connection to the forum's users. They were like him, outsiders, people who carried secrets they couldn't share with the world. In their honesty, he found a mirror for his own fractured psyche. As grotesque as the subject matter was, it awakened something inside him, a longing to escape his numb existence, even if it meant stepping into the unthinkable. When he came across a post from someone named Armin Mayos, Burns' curiosity turned to fascination. The post was unlike the others. It wasn't a vague or hypothetical discussion, it was a detailed request. The author, Armin, was seeking a partner for an act that defied comprehension. He described a desire to consume another person, but not through violence or force. He sought a willing participant, someone who would consent to becoming part of a shared, intimate experience. Burns read the post several times, his heart pounding in his chest. He tried to understand why he didn't close the page in disgust, why he felt compelled to read every word. Something about the clarity and precision of Armin's message resonated with him. It was as if this stranger had reached into his soul and touched the darkest, most hidden part of him. Against his better judgment, Burns replied. The message he sent was tentative at first, a question rather than a statement. He wanted to know if Armin was serious. Was this a game, a strange form of role play? Or was this a real offer? When Armin responded, his words left no doubt. This was no fantasy. It was a carefully considered plan, one that he was ready to execute. What began as a single email quickly turned into an intense exchange. Armin explained his desires in meticulous detail, describing how he envisioned the act and the steps involved. Burns, to his own astonishment, found himself responding with equal enthusiasm. He wasn't merely curious, he was eager. For a man who had spent years feeling invisible, the prospect of being part of something so intimate, so extreme, felt like a form of salvation. Burns' responses grew bolder as the correspondence deepened. He wasn't merely consenting, he was actively contributing to the plan. He suggested ideas, asked questions, and outlined his preferences. For the first time in years, he felt alive. The act they were planning, as horrifying as it was, gave him a sense of purpose. He began to see it as an escape not just from the pain of his life, but from the emptiness that had defined it. The discussions between the two men became increasingly detailed. They talked about logistics, the timing, even what would happen in the aftermath. Burns requested specific steps, insisting on certain conditions to ensure his experience matched his vision. Armin, meticulous by nature, agreed to everything, adapting his plan to accommodate Burns' wishes. The correspondence revealed two deeply broken men. For Armin, Burns' willingness was validation, proof that his desires were more than just fantasies. For Burns, the arrangement offered an escape from the emptiness that had consumed him, a way to end his life in a manner that felt meaningful, however grotesque. As the day of their meeting approached, Burns felt a strange mix of anticipation and peace. He booked a one-way train ticket to Rotenburg, leaving behind his apartment, his job, and the life he had grown to despise. He packed lightly, carrying only the essentials, knowing he would never need them again. On the surface, everything about his departure seemed ordinary. The train station was crowded, filled with the mundane sounds of announcements and shuffling feet. Yet for Burns, every step he took felt monumental. He was leaving behind the life that had suffocated him for so long, walking toward an unknown that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. As the train sped through the countryside, Burns stared out the window, watching the urban sprawl of Berlin give way to rolling fields and dense forests. He thought about the farmhouse waiting for him, the man he had never met but felt an inexplicable connection to. The questions that had haunted him in the weeks leading up to this moment no longer mattered. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back. The train slowed as it approached Rotenburg, the station coming into view. Burns' heart raced as he stepped onto the platform, scanning the small crowd for the man he had been corresponding with. In the distance, he saw someone, a tall, thin figure standing apart from the others. Their eyes met, and Burns felt a strange calm wash over him. The journey that had begun in the darkest corners of the internet was now real. As he followed Armin out of the station, the quiet streets of Rotenburg stretched ahead, the farmhouse awaiting them at the edge of town. Whatever lay ahead, Burns had accepted it. For better or worse, his life as he knew it was over. On a cold and quiet night of March 9th, 2001, the farmhouse stood at the edge of a dense forest, its exterior weathered and unremarkable, a structure that seemed to dissolve into the landscape. Armin Mayos led Bernbrand inside, the two men stepping into a space that would soon become infamous. The interior of the house was eerily tidy, almost sterile, a reflection of Armin's methodical nature. The air was heavy, thick with the weight of unspoken anticipation. To an outsider, this was an ordinary home, but for Bernd, it was the final destination in a journey he had willingly embarked upon. Armin showed him around the house, moving with an unsettling calm. Each room was ordinary in its own way, a modest kitchen, a sparsely furnished living room, and a staircase that led to the upper floor. Yet Bernd's attention was drawn to a door that remained firmly shut, the one that led to the basement. He didn't need to ask what was behind it, he already knew. Armin had described it in their messages, the room he had prepared with painstaking care. It was both a stage and a sanctuary, the place where their shared fantasy would finally unfold. The two men shared a quiet understanding, their actions charged with purpose. There was no need for conversation. Everything had already been planned, every step agreed upon in meticulous detail. Bernd felt a strange sense of relief as he took in his surroundings. The farmhouse was nothing like the sterile, lifeless apartment he had left behind. Its rustic simplicity seemed to mirror the raw honesty of what was about to happen. For the first time in years, he felt grounded, fully present in the moment. Armin led him to a small guest room on the second floor, where he could leave his belongings. The bed was neatly made, the window overlooking the dense forest that bordered the property. Bernd placed his small bag on the bed, its contents minimal: a toothbrush, a change of clothes, and a handwritten letter he had left unsigned. The letter was not for Armin or anyone in particular. It was simply his attempt to make sense of his decision, to leave behind a fragment of himself for whoever might find it. As night fell, the farmhouse grew silent, its isolation amplified by the vast, dark forest that surrounded it. Armin prepared a meal, an ordinary dinner that felt surreal in its normalcy. They ate in silence, the only sounds the clinking of utensils and the occasional rustle of the wind outside. For Bernd, each bite was a reminder of the life he was about to leave behind. The food was simple but satisfying, a stark contrast to the complexity of what lay ahead. He savored every flavor, every texture, knowing it would be his last ordinary meal. After dinner, Armin invited Bernd to see the basement, the room slaughter chamber, where their plan would come to life. The descent down the narrow staircase felt like crossing a threshold, a point of no return. The basement was exactly as Armin had described it, its walls lined with plastic sheeting, the floor meticulously covered to prevent any trace of what was to come. A camcorder was positioned in the corner, its lens pointed at the center of the room. The setup was clinical, almost surgical in its precision, a chilling testament to Armin's dedication. Bernd's gaze lingered on the tools arranged neatly on a nearby table. Each one had been chosen with care, their purpose clear. It was both horrifying and strangely comforting to see how much thought Armin had put into every detail. This was not an act of impulsive violence. It was the culmination of months of planning, a shared vision brought to life. Bernd felt no fear, only a deep sense of inevitability. He had made his choice, and now it was time to see it through. Armin explained the steps they would take, his voice steady and measured. Bernd listened intently, his mind absorbing every detail. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing. They both understood the gravity of what they were about to do, the line they were about to cross. For Bernd, this was not an act of despair but one of liberation. He had spent so long feeling invisible, disconnected from the world, and now, for the first time, he felt seen. The preparations continued late into the night, each task completed with meticulous care. Armin checked and rechecked everything, his movements precise and deliberate. The room was transformed into a space that was both functional and symbolic, a place where two lives would intersect in a way that defied comprehension. Bernd watched in silence, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. He felt a strange mix of calm and anticipation, a sense of purpose that had eluded him for so long. As the hour grew late, Armin suggested they rest. Bernd returned to the guest room, the weight of the day settling over him. Lying in bed, he stared at the ceiling, his mind replaying the events that had brought him to this moment. He thought about the life he was leaving behind, the pain and emptiness that had defined it. He thought about the people he had known, the relationships that had unraveled, and the loneliness that had consumed him. Yet, Amidst the flood of memories, he felt no regret. This was his choice, his way of reclaiming control over a life that had felt so hopelessly out of his grasp. Sleep came in fragments, the hours slipping away in a haze of restless dreams. When morning arrived, the farmhouse was bathed in soft, golden light, the tranquility of the scene at odds with the darkness that lingered within its walls. Byrne rose from the bed, his mind clear and focused. Today was the day. Downstairs, Armin was already awake, preparing the final steps. The tension in the air was palpable, a silent acknowledgement of what was to come. Byrne felt a strange sense of calm as he joined him, the weight of his decision no longer a burden but a quiet certainty. The farmhouse, so ordinary and unassuming, was now the center of a chilling pact, a place that would soon be etched into infamy. As they moved through the motions of their plan, time seemed to slow, every moment stretching into eternity. The world outside continued as it always had, unaware of the darkness unfolding within these walls. For Byrne, this was not an end but a transformation, a final act of defiance against a life that had left him feeling so powerless. What lay ahead was horrifying, yet in its own twisted way, it was also the fulfillment of a desire he could no longer deny. The air in the farmhouse was thick with anticipation, a stifling weight that neither man could ignore. The morning passed in silence, each moment steeped in the grim knowledge of what was to come. Armin moved methodically, double-checking the preparations, ensuring that nothing was left to chance. Every action was precise, every movement deliberate. The basement, with its plastic-lined walls and carefully arranged tools, stood ready a sterile and chilling stage for the pact they had forged. Byrne, too, prepared in his own way. His steps were slow and measured as if savoring each fleeting moment of normalcy. He had spent the morning writing one final letter, leaving it folded neatly on the nightstand in the guest room. The words were brief, an explanation that would mean little to those who would eventually find it. It was not a plea for forgiveness, nor an apology. It was simply a reflection of his inner thoughts, a small attempt to leave behind a piece of himself in the world he was about to depart. As the day unfolded, the farmhouse seemed to grow quieter, the silence pressing in from every corner. The surrounding forest, dense and impenetrable, stood as a silent witness to what would soon take place. Armin and Byrne avoided eye contact for most of the day, their shared purpose unspoken but ever present. It was as though they were caught in a trance, their actions guided by the inevitability of the moment they had both agreed upon. The preparations were finally complete by mid-afternoon. Armin had set everything into place with meticulous care. The tools gleamed under the harsh light of the basement, their sinister purpose unmistakable. The camcorder sat ready in the corner, its lens trained on the center of the room. Everything about the space was sterile, impersonal, yet charged with a sense of foreboding. The basement, with its cold, clinical setup, now seemed more like a macabre laboratory than part of a home. Byrne descended the stairs slowly, each step a reminder of the decision he had made. His mind was calm, his thoughts eerily focused. He had imagined this moment countless times, had replayed it in his head during his long, sleepless nights. Now that it was real, he felt none of the fear he had expected. Instead, there was only acceptance, a quiet understanding that this was the conclusion he had chosen for himself. As the two men stood in the room, the gravity of the situation settled over them like a heavy shroud. Armin began the process with the same meticulousness that had defined every step of their correspondence. He explained what he was doing, his voice steady and deliberate, ensuring that Byrne understood every detail. Byrne nodded silently, his gaze unwavering. The camcorder whirred softly as it began recording, capturing every moment in stark detail. The process was clinical, almost detached, yet the underlying horror of the act was impossible to ignore. Byrne, still conscious, requested specific steps be carried out, as if scripting his own demise. Armin worked with precision, following the steps they had agreed upon with unsettling calm. Byrne, for his part, remained composed, his expression one of grim determination. There was no struggle, no resistance, only a chilling sense of mutual agreement. The air in the room seemed to grow colder, the walls closing in as the act unfolded. As the hours passed, the basement became a scene of unimaginable horror. The room, so meticulously prepared, was now a stark contrast to the cake in place within it. Blood stained the plastic sheeting, a visceral reminder of the grim reality of their pact. The camcorder continued to record, its lens capturing every moment with unflinching clarity. The silence that had defined the day was now punctuated by the sounds of Armin's work, the quiet efficiency of a man carrying out a plan he had spent months perfecting. Byrne's body lay still on the table, a lifeless shell that no longer bore the pain and emptiness he had carried for so long. Byrne was dead, and Armin was left alone in the silence of his farmhouse. For Armin, the moment was both triumphant and surreal. He had spent years dreaming of this act, had devoted countless hours to planning every detail. Now that it was complete, he felt a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. The act itself had been everything he had imagined, yet the reality of it left him with more questions than answers. Armin paused, his hands trembling as he surveyed the scene before him. The room was silent once more, the air heavy with the scent of blood and death. The enormity of what he had done began to sink in, a weight that pressed down on him with crushing force. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, had committed an act that would forever define him. Yet, amidst the horror and regret, there was also a sense of fulfillment, a dark and twisted satisfaction that he could not deny. The farmhouse, once a place of quiet solitude, was now a house of horrors. The walls, still lined with plastic sheeting, seemed to close in around Armin as he worked to clean the space. He moved with the same methodical precision, his mind racing with thoughts of what would come next. The camcorder, still running in the corner, stood as a silent witness to the events that had unfolded within the basement. As the day turned to night, the farmhouse grew eerily quiet once more. The forest outside remained still, its dense canopy of trees casting long shadows across the property. Inside, Armin sat alone in the kitchen, his hands stained with blood, his thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The act that had consumed his thoughts for so long was now a reality, a chilling testament to the darkness that had taken root within him. Despite the horror of what he had done, Armin felt no immediate sense of guilt. He had followed through on a shared desire, had fulfilled a pact that both he and Byrne had entered into willingly. Yet, as the hours passed, he began to realize the enormity of what he had done. The consequences of his actions loomed large, an ever-present reminder that the world outside the farmhouse would not understand the twisted logic that had brought them to this point. Armin's thoughts turned to the future, to the questions that would inevitably come when the truth of his actions was discovered. For now, the farmhouse remained a secret, its horrors hidden from the world. But the silence would not last. The walls of the basement, the forest surrounding the property, even the quiet streets of Rotenburg, all of it seemed to hold the weight of the dark truth that would soon come to light. The farmhouse grew colder in the days following Byrne's death. The act that Armin Meos had fantasized about for years was complete, yet the satisfaction he had anticipated gave way to a gnawing void. The silence within the house was overwhelming, its oppressive weight pressing down on him. The meticulously planned event had unfolded exactly as he had envisioned, but the aftermath was far messier than he had prepared for both physically and emotionally. Armin spent the first hours cleaning the basement, erasing the evidence of the horrific scene. The plastic sheets that had protected the walls and floor were stained, and the tools he had so carefully arranged now seemed grotesque in their utility. He worked methodically, scrubbing every surface, ensuring no trace of the act remained. The camcorder, now silent, held hours of footage, a chilling chronicle of the events that had transpired. Once the basement was spotless, Armin turned his attention to the remains, a grim task that required both precision and emotional detachment. In the solitude of his kitchen, Armin began the macabre process of fulfilling the second part of his fantasy. The flesh, carefully prepared, came a meal he had long imagined but never thought he would truly experience. He cooked with meticulous care, as though crafting a masterpiece. The irony of the situation was not lost on him. The mundane act of cooking contrasted sharply with the enormity of his actions. When he finally sat down to eat, the room was bathed in an eerie stillness. Every bite was deliberate, yet the taste did not bring the satisfaction he had expected. Instead, it left him hollow, the experience unable to fill the void that had driven him to this point. Days turned into weeks, and Armin began to feel the weight of his actions in ways he had not anticipated. The act itself had been an escape from his isolation, a connection with another human being in the most intimate and horrifying way possible. But now he was left more alone than ever, his dark secret a constant companion. The farmhouse, once his sanctuary, became a prison, its walls bearing silent witness to his guilt. The forest that surrounded the property, once a source of comfort, now seemed to encroach on him, its dense canopy a reminder of how isolated he truly was. The footage from the camcorder remained untouched, locked away in a cabinet in the living room. Armin couldn't bring himself to watch it. The thought of reliving that day was both repulsive and tempting, a conflict that gnawed at him in quiet moments. Instead, he threw himself into routine, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. He continued to tend to the farmhouse, went on walks through the forest, and even ventured into town for supplies. To those who saw him, he appeared as he always had, quiet, unassuming, and polite. Yet, beneath the surface, he was unraveling. Armin's solitude proved to be his undoing. The weight of the secret he carried was too much for one person to bear. He began to return to the forums where it all had started, posting cryptic messages that hinted at what he had done. He didn't seek recognition or approval. Instead, he sought connection, a way to feel less alone in the aftermath of his act. But the internet, vast and anonymous, was an unpredictable place. What he didn't anticipate was that not everyone in the forums shared his level of depravity. What he saw as a safe space to share his thoughts soon became the first thread in his unraveling. One user, intrigued by Armin's posts, began asking pointed questions. The anonymity of the forum emboldened Armin, and he shared more than he intended. The details he revealed were specific, chilling in their precision. The user, disturbed by what they read, reported the post to authorities, setting off a chain of events that would lead to the farmhouse. Armin was unaware that his words, written in the solitude of his home, were now being scrutinized by law enforcement. On December 10th, 2002, the knock at his door came one crisp autumn morning, shattering the fragile illusion of normalcy he had clung to. The officers, armed with a warrant, searched the property, uncovering evidence that confirmed their darkest suspicions. The investigators found tools in the freezer contained neatly wrapped packages of human flesh, each labeled with chilling precision. The slaughter chamber remained untouched, a macabre time capsule of the crime. Most damning of all was the camcorder, with a harrowing record of Burns' final hours with its untouched footage, became the centerpiece of their investigation. As they played the tape, the full horror of Armin's actions was laid bare, the stark imagery leaving no room for doubt. Armin offered no resistance during his arrest. In many ways it was a relief. The burden of his secret had become unbearable, and the prospect of finally unburdening himself was almost comforting. During his interrogation, he spoke with the same calm precision that had defined his actions. He confessed without resistance, claiming the act had been consensual. He described every detail, from the initial correspondence with Byrne to the day they met, to the act itself. His words were chilling in their detachment, a stark contrast to the horror of what he described. Meows was arrested in December 2002 and was diagnosed with a schizoid personality, but deemed fit to stand trial. The trial that followed captured international attention. The media quickly dubbed him the Cannibal of Rotenburg, and the case sparked a global debate about morality, legality, and mental illness. The details of the case leaving the public both horrified and fascinated. Psychologists and criminologists debated Armin's motivations, trying to understand how an unassuming man could commit such a monstrous act. The prosecution argued that consent was irrelevant in such a grotesque act. The defense countered that Armin had not violated Byrne's autonomy, framing the case as an extreme form of assisted suicide. The footage from the camcorder, played in court, became the most damning piece of evidence, its stark imagery leaving even the most hardened observers shaken. Armin's calm demeanor in the footage stood in stark contrast to the brutality of his actions, a paradox that confounded those who sought to understand him. In 2004, Armin was convicted of murder, his defense that the act had been consensual failing to sway the jury and sentenced to 8 years and 6 months in prison. In April 2005, a German court ordered a retrial after prosecutors appealed Meows' sentence, arguing that he should have been convicted of murder because he killed for sexual gratification, a motive proved by his having videotaped the crime. The court ruled that the original trial had ignored the significance of the video in disproving the argument that Meows only killed because he had been asked to kill. At his retrial, a psychologist stated that Mios could reoffend as he still had fantasies about devouring the flesh of young people. On 10th May 2006, a court in Frankfurt convicted Mios of murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment. As of 2020, Mios has been allowed to go outside of prison for supervised excursions in disguise around town in a different state. In prison, Mios works at the laundry and often attends church service. His case became a landmark in German legal history, leading to debates about laws surrounding consensual acts of violence and euthanasia. As he was sentenced to life in prison, his name forever associated with one of the most disturbing crimes in modern history. From behind bars, he granted interviews, presenting himself as a misunderstood man whose actions were born of loneliness and longing. The farmhouse in Rotenburg, once a place of solitude and peace, became infamous, its dark legacy overshadowing its quiet, rural setting. The forest surrounding it seemed to grow darker, as though bearing the weight of the secrets it had witnessed. For the people of Rotenburg and the world, the story of the Cannibal of Rotenburg would never be forgotten. In 2023, Mios' former home burnt down in what was suspected to be an arson attack. 2 juvenile suspects are under investigation, but no arrests have been made. In the end, Armin Mios became a symbol of the unimaginable depths of human depravity. His story served as a chilling reminder of the dangers of isolation, the internet's ability to connect even the darkest corners of humanity, and the horrifying consequences of a desire taken to its extreme. Yet, for those who had known him before his descent into darkness, the question remained, was Armin always a monster, or had the emptiness of his life created one? This has been the chilling tale of the Cannibal of Rotenburg, a meal to die for, a case that forces us to confront the darkest corners of human psychology and the terrifying power of anonymity in the digital age. If this story left you haunted, be sure to subscribe to Mystery Minds for more true crime tales that unravel the mysteries of human behavior. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we never see coming.